Months passed and the Kaleri Empire entered a time of quiet change. The obsidian spire no longer hummed with tension, but with the soft rustle of leaves and the gentle buzz of alien bees drawn to Daniel's ever-growing garden. The once cold halls now held patches of green moss and flowering vines that curled around pillars like old friends. Queen Lyra found herself walking those halls more often not to inspect or command, but simply to watch Daniel work. He never asked for anything, not more. Space, not better tools, not even a seat at her council table. Yet his presence changed everything. The other Kaleri nobles did not understand. At first they whispered behind closed doors, calling him a fraud, a trickster who used strange earth magic to fool their queen. But then they saw the proof with their own eyes. A young Kaleri child fell from a high balcony during a festival. The healers said there was nothing they could do. Her bones were shattered, her life force fading fast. Daniel was called not because anyone believed he could help, but because Lyra insisted. He knelt beside the girl and placed his hands on her chest. Not with force, but with care. A soft green light spread from his palms into her body. The crowd held its breath. Then the girl opened her eyes, sat up and smiled. Her wounds gone as if they had never been. After that, even the harshest critics fell silent. Daniel still spoke little. He spent his days teaching Kaleri children how to plant seeds, how to listen to the soil, how to be patient. He told them stories of earth, of oceans that stretched forever, of forests so tall they kissed the clouds. The children listened wide-eyed, their silver skin glowing with wonderlight. Ra watched from a distance one afternoon as Daniel showed a group of young ones how to hold a sprout without crushing it. His voice low and kind. "You do not own life," he said. "You borrow it for a while, and you must give it back better than you found it." Those words stayed with her. She had ruled by taking, by demanding, by punishing. But Daniel ruled by giving even when no one asked. One evening, she joined him in the garden, the stars above casting silver light on the leaves. "Why do you stay?" she asked. "You could return to Earth. Your people need you there." He looked at her, his eyes warm. "I am where I am needed most right now. But you have no title, no power, no army." He smiled. "I have roots and roots. Hold worlds together." She did not answer, but something in her chest loosened like a knot, finally undone. Then came the message from the Outer Rim, a distress call from a human colony on the planet Varelia. It had been attacked by raiders, not Kaelari, but a rogue faction of the Zenth, a warlike species known for burning entire systems to ash. The colony was small, only a few hundred souls, but they were human, and Daniel's people era expected him to beg her for help. But he did not. Instead, he packed a small bag with seeds and water and prepared to leave. "You cannot go alone," she said. "I must," he replied. "If I ask your fleet to go, it becomes a war. If I go alone, it becomes a chance," she argued. But he was firm, and in the end she let him go. Though it pained her more than any battle wound. He traveled on a small shuttle. No weapons, no shields. Just him and his bag of seeds when he arrived on Varelia. The colony was in ruins, buildings, burned crops, blackened bodies buried in shallow graves. The survivors huddled in a bunker, their eyes hollow with grief. Daniel did not speak at first. He walked through the wreckage, his hands brushing broken walls and scorched earth. Then he began to plant. He dug small holes in the ash-filled soil and dropped in seeds. The survivors watched confused. Why plant when there is no tomorrow? But within hours, green shoots pushed through the black ground. By morning, the fields were alive with color. Flowers bloomed where fire had raged. Trees sprouted from cracked earth, their branches offering shade to the weary. The Zenth raiders returned expecting to finish what they started, but when they landed, their boots sank into soft grass, not ash. Their weapons felt heavy in their hands, as if the air itself resisted violence. Daniel stood before them. "Unarmed, go home," he said. "Your war ends here." They laughed and raised their guns, but the ground beneath them trembled. Not with quake, but with life-thick roots wrapped around their legs, not to harm, but to still them. Vines curled around their weapons, pulling them gently from their grips. Sown raider broke, free in charge. Daniel did not move. The man stopped inches away, his eyes wide. Not with rage, but with memory, he saw his own home. His mother's garden, the taste of fruit from his childhood. He dropped to his knees and wept. The others followed soon. The entire raiding party sat in silence as Daniel handed them seeds. Take these, he said, plant something. Grow something. Do not take again. When Lyra's scouts reported what had happened, she did not believe it until she saw the footage. Daniel standing, alone against an army and winning not with fire but with life. She sent a ship to bring him back, but when he returned, he was not alone. Hundreds of Zenth walked behind him, not as prisoners but as students. They carried shovels, not swords, and in their hands small pots with sprouting plants. The Empire watched in stunned silence as former enemies entered the obsidian spire. Not to fight, but to learn. Lyra met Daniel at the gate. Her heart fully, you did not just save a colony. She said, you changed a people. He shook his head, no. They changed themselves, I only reminded them they were part of something bigger. That night the spire held a feast not of conquest, but of sharing Kalari Zenth. And humans sat together eating food grown in Daniel's garden, laughing in broken tongues, finding common ground in the soil beneath their feet. Lyra stood beside Daniel, looking out over the crowdy. You showed them power, she said, but not the kind anyone expected. He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. Real power is not in ruling others, she said, it is in helping them rise, and for the first time the Queen of 1,000 Worlds understood that the strongest throne is not made of crystal or steel, but of roots that hold everything together. The galaxy would never be the same, but it would be better not because of war or fear, but because one quiet man from Earth chose to plant a seed instead of swing a sword, and from that seed, a new future grew one leaf at a time. Peace settled over the Kalari Empire like morning dew, but it was a fragile peace not carved in stone but grown like a sapling needing care. Daniel knew this better than anyone. He walked the gardens each day, not as a hero but as a gardener, checking on each plant as if it were a friend. Queen Lyra ruled differently. Now she held council not in the shadowed throne room, but in the open garden where sunlight filtered through living vines and the air smelled of blooming star lilies. She listened, more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was with questions, not commands. Still not all were pleased. The old guard, the ones who had built the empire on fear and fire, watched Daniel with narrowed eyes. They called him the Green Whisperer, a title meant to mock, but which the people began to use with reverence. Among them was Elder Voran, a high counselor who had served 3 queens before Lyra. He believed strength came from control, not compassion, and he saw Daniel as a threat, not to the throne, but to the very soul of the Kalari. Waveran began to gather allies, quietly speaking in dark chambers to those who missed the old days of conquest. He did not call for war, not yet, but he planted seeds of doubt, just as Daniel planted seeds of hope. Meanwhile, Daniel received a message from Earth, not from the Federation, but from his sister Maya. She was sick. The new strain of the Terra Blight, a disease that ate away at the body's ability to heal, had reached their home colony, and the medicine was not working. Daniel's hands shook as he read the words. He had not seen Maya in 10 years, but she was all the family he had. Lyra saw his pain. She did not ask what was wrong. She simply stood beside him and waited. My sister is dying, he said finally. Then, we go to her, she replied without hesitation. But Earth is weeks away even at full speed. Then we leave now. They took a small ship, no escort, no fanfare. Just the 2 of them and a bag of special seeds. Daniel had been growing in secret seeds that glowed, faintly blue and pulsed like a slow heartbeat. The journey was quiet. Daniel stared out the viewport, lost in memory. Lyra sat beside him, not speaking, just being there. When they arrived on Earth, the colony was worse than he feared. Gray skies hung low. Over withered fields, the people moved slowly, their faces pale and drawn. Maya lay in a small room, her breathing shallow, her skin cool to the touch. Daniel knelt beside her and held her hand. I am here, he whispered. She opened her eyes weakly. Danny, you came away. She took one of the blue seeds and placed it in her palm. Then he pressed his other hand over hers. A soft light spread from their joined hands, filling the room with a gentle hum. The seed dissolved into her skin, and color returned. To her cheeks her breath deepened and she sat up. How he asked the healers. Earth is tired, Daniel, she said. The soil is sick, the water is thin. We pushed too hard for too long. He looked out the window at the dying land and knew what he had to do with Lyra's help. He gathered the colonists and led them to the center of the settlement there. He dug a deep hole and placed the last of the blue seeds inside. It was not just a seed. It was a heart, a living core, grown from earth soil, Kailari crystal, and human hope. He poured water over it and sang an old song his grandmother had taught him, a song of rain and roots and return. The ground trembled, then split open, not with destruction, but with life. Thick roots shot downward, while a great tree rose, upward, its bark silver like Kailari skin, its leaves green like earthgrass, its flowers blooming with soft violet light like the obsidian spire. The tree pulsed and a wave of energy spread across the land. Rivers ran clear again. Crops sprouted in minutes. The air grew sweet and clean. The people wept as color returned to their world. But the effort cost Daniel. He collapsed at the base of the tree, his body weak, his breath shallowly. Ra caught him in her arms. "No," she whispered, "not you." He smiled, faintly. "It is okay, the tree will care for them now. You cannot leave me, I am not leaving," he said. "I am becoming part of it." His skin began to glow faintly green and tiny vines curled around his fingers, not taking his life but weaving it into the worldly realm. Refused to let go. She held him tight, and in that moment she did something no Kailari queen had ever done. She begged not with power but with love. The tree responded, a branch lowered and touched her forehead, and she saw everything: Daniel's memories, his pain, his joy, his endless belief in life. Even when it seemed lost, she understood then that he was not dying. He was changing. When she opened her eyes, Daniel stood before her, not as a man but as something more. His form shimmered between human and light, his eyes holding galaxies and gardens alike. "I am still here," he said, "just in more places now." Back on the obsidian spire, the tree's roots had already begun to spread through the halls connecting Earth and Empire in a living network of peace. Voran saw this and knew his time was over. He came to the garden one last time. Not with weapons, but with shame. "I was wrong," he said to Lyra. She looked at him not with anger, but with pity. "You were afraid. Yes, fear is natural, but it should not rule." Usfaran knelt and took a seed from the ground. "I would like to learn." And so the old ways faded, not by force, but by choice. Years passed. The galaxy changed slowly but surely. Wars did not vanish, but they grew. Fewer planets, once barren, now bloomed with life, and the story of the human who married a queen and healed worlds became legendly. Ra never remarried. She walked the gardens every day, sometimes alone, sometimes with children of many species, learning to grow things together. And if you listen closely on a quiet night beneath the twin moons of the capital world, you can still hear Daniel's voice in the rustle of leaves, a soft whisper reminding all who hear it that the greatest power is not to destroy but to help life begin again. The end. Years flowed like rivers through the Kailari Empire, and the changes Daniel began had taken deep root. Cities once built of cold metal now bloomed with living walls. Schools taught children to grow food before they learned to wield weapons, and the old war fleets had been repurposed into siege ships carrying life to dead worlds. Queen Lyra ruled with a quiet strength that no one had expected. She no longer wore armor of living metal, but robes woven from vine silk that shimmered with soft green. Light. Her council was made not of generals but of farmers, healers, and teachers from many species. Still, peace was not perfect. Far beyond the known systems in the void between galaxies, something stirred. It was old, older than the Kailari, older than Earth, a hunger that fed on silence and stillness. It had no name, but the few who sensed it called it the Hollowit. Did not attack with ships or soldiers. It came as absence, a slow draining of life where it passed stars, dimmed plants, withered, and beings forgot how to hope. The first sign came from a distant human outpost on the edge of explored space. The colonists sent one final message before their comms went dark. Not a cry for help, but a whisper. "We feel emptily." Ra felt it too. A cold spot. In her mind where warmth used to be, she knew it was not illness or war, it was something worse. She went to the great tree at the heart of the obsidian spire, its silver bark now covered in glowing runes that pulsed with the rhythm of 1,000 worlds. Daniel's presence lived within it. not as a ghost, but as a current of life flowing through every leaf and roots. He placed her hand on the trunk and closed her eyes. "It is coming," he said, his voice like wind through branches. "What is it? A memory of the time before life, when the universe was only dust and cold. It does not hate. It simply wants to return everything to silence. Can we stop it? Not with force, not with fire, only with more life." So, she called the seed ships back, not to plant on dead worlds, but to gather every living thing they could find: seeds, spores, fungi, even the tiniest microbes from 1,000 planets. They filled the holds of the old warships with the building blocks of life. Then she did something no Kalari queen had ever done. She asked for help. Messages went out to former enemies, to neutral systems, to forgotten colonies, and one by one they answered, not because they feared the Hollow, but because they remembered the man who planted gardens in the ruins of Warramong. The first to arrive was the Zenth raider who had once tried to kill Daniel. He now led a fleet of bioships grown from living coral. His people had become the galaxy's best soil weavers. They brought barrels of nutrient-rich earth from their homeworld even. Elder Varan came not as a counselor but as a humble gardener, his hands rough from years of tending Kalari moss farms. He carried a single pot with a sprout that had bloomed under 3 suns. They gathered at the edge of known space where the stars grew thin and the void felt heavily. Ra stood on the bridge of her ship beside the great tree's newest offshoot, a sapling grown in zero gravity. Its roots coiled around the ship's core. Daniel's voice came through the comms, calm as ever. "This is where we make our stand, not with weapons but with welcome." The Hollow came not as a storm but as a slow fade. The stars ahead blinked out one by one. The sensors showed no energy, no mass, just nothing. Then the seed ships opened, not with missiles, but with life. Clouds of spores drifted into the void. Seeds wrapped in protective shells shot forward like comets. Vines uncoiled from the hulls, reaching into the dark. At first, nothing happened. The Hollow swallowed it all. Silence deepened, but then a single green light flickered, then another, then thousands. The life they sent did not fight the Hollow. It simply existed, and in existing it pushed back the silence. A new forest grew in the void, not of wood and leaf but of light and will. The Hollow recoiled not in pain but in confusion. It had never met something that chose to grow in the face of nothing. Lyra watched as the darkness shrank, pulled back by the relentless push of life. She felt Daniel beside her, not in body but in spirit, his presence warm and steady. "You did it," she whispered. "We did it," he replied. When it was over, the edge of the galaxy was no longer empty. It was filled with a strange new ecosystem, floating gardens that glowed in the dark, schools of light fish that swam between asteroid roots and trees whose branches held tiny stars like fruit. The Hollow was gone, not destroyed but transformed, its emptiness filled with possibility. On the way home, Varan stood beside Lyra on the observation deck. "I spent my life believing strength was control," he said. "Now I see it is trust in what in life itself." Back on the capital world, celebrations began not with parades but with planting. Every child was given a seed and a patch of ground to care for. The message was simple: you are part of this now. Lyra walked through the crowds until she reached the great tree. Daniel's form shimmered briefly in the bark, then faded like morning mist. She did not speak. She did not need to. That night, she sat in the garden alone. The stars above bright and full of promise. She thought of Earth, of Maya, who now led a healing grove on her homeworld. She thought of the Zenth raider teaching children how to weave soil from stardust. She thought of Voran kneeling in the dirt, his old hands gentle around a sprout. And she knew the work would never end, but that was all right, because as long as someone was willing to plant a seed, the darkness would never win. The galaxy was no longer ruled by empires or federations. It was tended like a garden by many hands from many worlds, all learning the same quiet truth that had once lived in one human man: life does not conquer. It grows, and in growing it makes room for everyone, even the lost, even the broken, even the hollow. And so the story continued, not with a bang but with a bloom, one small green shoot at a time, reaching always toward the light. In the heart of the galactic core floated the obsidian spire, a towering structure of black crystal that pulsed with violet energy. It was the seat of power for the Kailari Empire ruled by Queen Lyra. a being of impossible grace with silver skin that shimmered like starlight and eyes that held the depth of dying stars. She was feared across 1,000 worlds not just for her beauty but for her merciless judgment. For centuries, the Kailari had dominated the galaxy through superior technology. In psychic warfare, they saw other species as lesser life forms useful only for labor or conquest. But peace talks with the Human Federation had begun after decades of Cold War tension. Both sides agreed to a symbolic union to seal the fragile truce. Queen Lyra would marry a human male. The choice shocked everyone. Lyra selected Daniel Carter, a quiet man from Earth who worked as a botanist on a remote terraforming colony. He was unremarkable by human standards, tall but lean with soft brown eyes, and hands always stained with soil. He had no military record, no political ties, just a calm presence that somehow made others feel safe. The ceremony took place aboard the Obsidian Spire. Thousands of alien dignitaries watched as Daniel stood beside Lyra in simple white robes while she wore armor woven from living metal. He did not flinch under their stares, nor did he bow when the high priest demanded it. He simply looked at Lyra and smiled. After the vows were spoken, Lyra led him to her private chambers. The walls shifted like liquid shadow responding to her thoughts. She turned to him, her voice cool and distant. "You are here as a symbol. Nothing more. Do not expect affection or favor." Daniel nodded. "I understand," he said softly. "I am here to help, not to take." For weeks he stayed in the spire, treated as little more than a ghost. Servants ignored him. Guards watched him with suspicion. Even the air seemed to reject his presence, but Daniel did not complain. He spent his days tending to a small patch of earth he had brought from Earth, planting seeds that struggled to grow under alien light. Meanwhile, unrest brewed in the Empire. Several warlords saw the marriage as weakness. They whispered that the queen had gone soft, that she allowed a primitive to share her throne. One night, a group of assassins slipped into the spire, their blades forged from null metal that could cut through psychic shields. They found Daniel alone in the garden, his back turned as he watered a young sapling. They moved silently, but he turned as if he had known they were there. His eyes were calm. "Not afraid you should leave," he said. The lead assassin laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "You are meat, nothing more." They lunged, but Daniel did not move. Instead, the ground beneath them cracked open, not from force but from something deeper. The very air thickened and the assassins froze, not from fear, but from an invisible pressure that held them in place. Daniel stepped forward, his voice still gentle, but now carrying a weight that made the walls hum. "You do not understand what you are dealing with." Lyra watched from the shadows, her psychic senses flaring. She had felt something shift the moment the assassins entered the garden. Not an energy surge, not a weapon, but something older, something that bent reality itself around Daniel. She confronted him the next morning in the garden where his plants now bloomed with impossible colors. Flowers that glowed with soft gold light and leaves that hummed faint melodies. "What are you?" she asked, her voice sharp with suspicion. "Just a man who loves growing things," he replied, but his eyes held something ancient. She pressed harder. "You stopped 5 elite assassins without moving a muscle, without using any known tech or psychic ability," explained. Daniel sighed and sat on a stone bench beside a vine that curled around his wrist like a pet. "I told you I am just a botanist, but Earth has secrets even we do not fully understand." He looked at her then with a sadness that made her chest tighten. "My people were not always peaceful. We were once warriors too, but we learned that true strength is not in destruction, but in creation." He reached out and touched a flower. It bloomed instantly, petals unfolding like tiny hands reaching. "For the sky, this is what I do. I help life grow even in the darkest places." Lyra wanted to dismiss him, but something in his words echoed in her own soul. She had ruled through fear because she believed it was the only way to maintain order, but watching him she saw another path. Days later, the rebellion erupted. Warlord Krex, a brutal commander with a fleet of warships, declared the marriage void and marched on the Obsidian Spire. His forces surrounded the capital planet, their cannons aimed at the spire, ready to reduce it to dust. Lyra prepared for battle, her psychic storm gathering in the skies above. But Daniel stopped her. "Let me try," he said. "You cannot fight a fleet with flowers," she snapped. Not with flowers, he said with a small smile. With roots, he walked to the edge of the spire where the void of space began and knelt. He placed his hands on the black crystal floor and closed his eyes for a long moment. Nothing happened. Then the spire trembled. From its base, thick vines shot out. Not ordinary vines, but living cables of emerald light that wrapped around the attacking ships, not crushing them, but connecting to them like neural threads. The ships shuddered, then powered down their weapons. Falling silent one by one, Krek screamed, "Over the comms, what is this sorcery?" Daniel stood and spoke into the void, his voice carrying across the fleet. "You came to destroy, but life does not answer to violence. It answers to care." The vines pulsed, and the ships began to change their metal, hulls sprouting green moss, their engines quieting as if lulled to sleep. The crews inside felt a strange calm, a sense of peace they had never known. Krex tried to flee, but his ship would not respond. It had become part of something larger. Something. Alive Lyra stared at Daniel, her mind reeling. He had not fought, he had not killed, he had transformed the battlefield into a garden. How she whispered, "Earth was once a war-torn world." He said softly, "We almost destroyed ourselves. Then we learned to listen, to the planet, to work with it, not against it. This power is not mine. It is a gift from every living thing that ever grew under our sun." She looked at him, not as a symbol, not as a pawn, but as something new, something powerful, in a way she had never imagined. That night she sat with him in the garden, the stars above them, silent witnesses to what had changed. "You could have taken the throne from me," he said. "I do not want your throne." She replied, "I want to understand you." He smiled and offered her a flower. It glowed softly in her hand, warm like a heartbeat. In the weeks that followed, the empire changed. The warlords laid down their arms, not out of fear, but out of awe. They had seen a power greater than weapons, a power that healed instead of harmed. Lyra ruled differently now. Not with an iron will, but with open hands, she and Daniel walked the halls of the spire together. Not as queen and consort, but as partners. The humans were no longer seen as primitives, but as teachers of a forgotten truth, that the strongest force in the universe is not fire or steel, but the quiet persistence of life. And in the heart of the obsidian spire, where once only shadows lived, now bloomed a garden that reached for the stars, its roots deep in alien soil, its branches cradling the dreams of two worlds finally learning to grow together. Daniel never sought glory. He simply tended his garden, and in doing so, reshaped a galaxy. Lyra watched him one evening as he spoke softly to a sapling. His fingers, brushing its leaves with care, she realized then that his power was not in what he could destroy, but in what he could awaken. And for the first time in her long life, she felt hope, not as a weapon, but as a seed waiting to bloom. Time moved gently through the galaxy like a slow river carrying stories from world to world. The great tree at the heart of the Kalari capital had grown so large its branches brushed the lower moons, and its roots ran deep into the planets. Core children played in its shade while elders taught them how to listen to the whisper of leaves. Queen Lyra no longer called herself queen. She preferred keeper of the garden, a title that made the old nobles uneasy. But the people loved it. They saw her not as a ruler, but as a guide, someone who walked beside them, not above them. Yet peace, like all living things, needed care, and sometimes it needed protection. A new signal came not from the void this time, but from deep within the Human Federation, a distress call from a research station orbiting a dead star. The message was broken but clear. They had found something they should not have. Lyra recognized the station. It was where Daniel had once worked before he was called to the spire. It was. There he first learned how to speak to seeds, how to feel the pulse of life in silent soils. He went alone this time. No fleet, no council. Just her and a small shuttle filled with cuttings from the great tree. When she arrived, the station was dark, its lights out, its hull scarred with strange cracks that looked less like damage and more like veins. Inside, the air was cold but not empty. It hummed with a low vibration that made her bones ache. In the central lab, she found the survivors huddled around. A sealed chamber inside floated a single black seed no bigger than her thumb, but it pulsed with a rhythm that matched her own heartbeat. "Do not touch it." The lead scientist whispered, "It sings to us. It shows us things." "What things?" "Our fears, our regrets. Our deepest wants, it gives us what we think we need, but it takes something in return. Lyra looked closer. The seed was not from any world. She knew it felt ancient and wrong, like a shadow given form. "This is not life," she said. "This is mimicry," as if in answer the seed glowed brighter and the walls of the chamber began to shift, forming faces of those who had died long ago. Loved ones lost in war or accident. The crew reached out, tears in their eyes. Lyra stepped forward and placed her hand on the chamber wall, not to break it but to speak. "You are not real," she said softly, and the faces flickered. Then she did something unexpected. She took a cutting from her bag, a small green vine grown from Daniel's tree, and pressed it against the glass. The black seed recoiled. The vine did not attack it. Simply existed, bright, warm, alive. The false faces melted away and the seed shrank back into silence. The scientists stared in awe. "How did you do that?" "I did not fight it," she said. "I reminded it what real life feels like." She sealed the seed in a container lined with living bark and brought it back to the capital. Not to destroy it, but to study it, to understand why something so empty would try to pretend to be alive. Back home, she placed the seed in a special garden surrounded by the strongest blooms from 100 worlds. She watched it day after day as it tried to copy them, growing black petals that mimicked roses or thorns that looked like Kailari crystal. But always, it failed because it had no root. No true connection to anything. One evening, as she sat by the garden, Daniel's presence stirred in the great tree. "That seed is lonely," he said. Lyra frowned. "How can something without a soul be lonely? It knows it is missing something. It sees life all around and wants to join, but it does not know how. So what do we do? Teach it." And so they tried. Lyra began speaking to the seed, not with commands, but with stories. She told it of earth, of rain on dry soil, of a boy who once cried when his first plant died. She told it of war and loss and the long road back to peace. At first, nothing happened, but after many weeks, a tiny crack appeared in the seed's shell. Not from force, but from within. A pale green shoot emerged, weak and trembling. Garden held its breath. Lyra did not touch it. She simply watered the soil and sang the old song Daniel had sung on Earth. Day by day, the shoot grew stronger, its leaves soft and silver like Kailari skin, its stem strong like human bone. It did not copy. Anymore it became. The scientists who had feared it now tended it with care. They named it Hope. News of the seed's change spread across the galaxy, and others came forward with their own broken things, lost artifacts, cursed relics, things that had been touched by the Hollow or by old wars. They brought them to the garden not to be destroyed but to be healed. A sword that had spilled too much blood was planted in the soil and grew into a willow whose leaves soothed pain. A data core filled with hate messages sprouted vines that carried songs of forgiveness. Even a war drone once programmed to kill now sat quietly in a corner of the garden, its metal body covered in moss, humming a lullaby to passing birds. The garden became a place of second chances. Lyra walked its paths every morning, greeting each new life by name. She no longer wore robes of power, but simple clothes stained with soil. Her hands rough from work, her heart full of quiet joy. One day a young Kailari girl ran up to her holding a wilted flower. "It is dying," she said, tears in her eyes. Lyra knelt and took the flower gently. "You did not fail," she said. "Sometimes things must fall, so new things can rise." She planted the flower at the base of the great tree, and together they waited. In 3 days a new bloom appeared, not the same, but just as beautiful. The girl smiled, and Lyra knew the lesson had taken root. That night, as stars blinked awake above the capital, she stood with Daniel's presence beside her. Not as a man, but as the wind in the leaves, the warmth in the soil, the light in every living thing. "You changed everything," she said. "No," he replied. "You let it change," and in that truth lay the final secret of their story. Power was never in ruling or winning or even in saving. Was in allowing life to find its own way. Even in the darkest corner, 7 and broken seeds. Evan and queens who learned to kneel. The galaxy was not perfect, but it was growing, and that was enough.